Welcome to the Public Sociologist. Everything social explained. My name is Kemal Budak and I teach sociology at Georgia Tech. Every semester, I teach hundreds of students, intro classes, religion, culture, and I get to watch something very interesting happen in real time. Students arrive with a strong belief about the world. Not always explicitly stated, but it is there. And it sounds like this: if I work hard enough, I'll get what I deserve. And what is interesting is not just that they believe it, it is how deeply they believe it. You can see it in how they talk about grades, how they interpret success, how they explain failure. And I have had moments in class where I push back on this idea just slightly, and you can feel the discomfort in the room. It is in the air. Because if that belief starts to crack, a lot of other things become uncertain. Now, to be clear, that belief isn't irrational, okay? It is actually necessary for functioning. If you didn't believe effort mattered, it would be very hard to stay motivated, invest in your future, or even get out of bed during midterm season at Georgia Tech. Which, to be fair, is already difficult. Okay, but here is the problem. The more you study society carefully, the harder it becomes to fully believe it. Let me give you a different entry point. A couple of years ago, there was a youth basketball game. I think it was under 16 girls between El Salvador and the United States. And it wasn't a close game. It was pretty much lopsided event. And it was something like 100-point difference. Okay. And at some point, it stops being a game and it becomes a structural demonstration. And no one watching that game said, well, clearly one team just wanted it more. No one said, they just needed better mindset. We understand immediately the resources, coaching, infrastructure, you name it, like long-term investment, nutritional patterns, etc., okay? In other words, structure. And this isn't unique. If you zoom out, this pattern repeats across sports globally. You know, countries that invest earlier, more systematically, more consistently, they produce better outcomes. Not because their individuals are inherently superior, but because their systems are better organized. If you don't believe me, check out the medal count from last summer's Paris Olympics and what happened there. Most of the time, it was, if you take a look at the top 5 countries, you're going to see USA, China, UK, France, Australia, etc., etc. These are at the same time the locomotive, economically and financially locomotive countries of the world. So their success in sport isn't just coincidental. But the moment we move away from sports and into education, jobs, or income, something strange happens. We switch explanations. Suddenly we say, the winners earned it. That shift, or that inconsistency, is what this episode is all about. So, this podcast is built on a simple premise. If something in society feels natural, obvious, or deserved, there is probably a structure underneath it. So my plan is each week to take something familiar like success, culture, religion, sports, social media, and break it down sociologically. not to make things cynical, but to make them clearer. So, meritocracy is the idea that I'm going to give you a very simple definition that you can easily remember, okay? Meritocracy is the idea that people rise based on talent and effort. And again, don't get me wrong, there's some truth here. People really do work hard. They improve, they achieve. But sociology asks a slightly different question. Who gets the opportunity to develop merit in the first place? And I think this is a very critical question. Because I ask my students, a hypothetical case, if two students get the same GPA, did they put in the same effort? And they pause. Because once you start thinking about it, you realize maybe one student is working 20 hours a week, another might not need to work at all. One had AP classes and test prep, coming out of a very prestigious or elite high school. Or another is encountering this material for the first time. So same GPA, but completely different journeys. And sometimes I'll push them further. I'll ask, who knows how to succeed here? Because that's a, different question. And some students arrive already knowing how to email professors, how to ask for help, how to navigate deadlines. And others have to learn that while being evaluated, okay, that difference doesn't show up on the transcript, but it shapes the transcript. So meritocracy focuses on outcomes. But we sociologists focus on how those outcomes became possible. So at this point, we need a concept that explains what is happening beneath the surface. There was this French sociologist who passed away, and he's one of my favorite all-time sociologists. His name was Pierre Bourdieu. He calls this cultural capital. This isn't money. Cultural capital is how you speak, how you carry yourself, what feels natural in institutional settings. But Bourdieu goes a couple of steps further, but I'm going to only talk about one step further. He introduces another very intriguing concept called habitus. Habitus is your internalized sense of the world. It is like what feels possible to you, what feels like you, and what doesn't. Okay? Some students walk into office hours like, this space belongs to me. And, some other students walk in like, I hope I am allowed to be here. They act like as if they are entering a governmental building for the first time in their lives. Same university, same classroom, but different internal experience. And here's the critical point. Institutions reward the people who already feel comfortable inside them. Meritocracy assumes we are evaluating ability, right? But in practice, we usually evaluate, does this person operate in a way that feels familiar to me? Or more bluntly, do they make this interaction easy? Okay? So let's, for example, move from classroom to elite hiring practices. And I want to give you a very interesting example from our field, sociology. Dr. Lauren Rivera, a sociologist, she studied hiring in top firms, especially investment banking, and law firms, etc. And her book, the name of her book was, as far as I can remember, Pedigree and How Elite Students Get Elite Jobs. Very good book. And I teach that book in my Introduction to Sociology and Culture and Society classes. And the book shows in detail how this process works. Okay? And in her book, she demonstrates that these firms claim we hire the best. So what happens is that, what you expect is usually grades. Individuals are selected or hired based on their grades, based on their credentials, skills, etc., etc. But what actually happens is that candidates go through multiple interviews, and at some point evaluation shifts, and it becomes less about can you do the job and more about do you feel like one of us? So interviewers describe moments like talking about hobbies, casual conversation, shared experiences, okay? And for example, one interviewer said in the book, I remember, I chose the person I could imagine having a beer with, okay? And that's the filter after years of effort, after you invest thousands of dollars into your education, right? And I remember in the book, there's also this airport test that interviewers or employers kind of apply. An airport test is a very easy hypothetical question. Would you like myself to be stranded with this person at an airport for several hours? So, for example, one criterion when hiring people is this simple question that is called airport test. Would you really be willing to spend hours with this potential colleague at an airport, especially if you're, because of the layover or because of the plane is just delayed, etc. So they look for cultural fit rather than skill here, okay? So Rivera shows that candidates from elite backgrounds, they know how to perform with ease. They know how to signal confidence. And they also know how to navigate vague situations or ambiguity. Others may be equally capable, but less fluent in that performance. And that is not meritocracy. That is cultural familiarity being rewarded as competence. Why does this belief survive? I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One reason is that it feels right, because we want to believe effort matters. Okay. Another reason, or maybe the second reason I should say, it keeps people moving, because without it, motivation collapses. And the third reason, maybe the most important, it individualizes the failure. So instead of structure, we get self-blame. I think that also reminds me of Karl Marx's idea of false consciousness, because Karl Marx was also saying that a factory worker, when they can't make enough money, they were blaming themselves, saying, hey, I should work harder, instead of putting the blame on the system or the structure. So this is false consciousness. So we also sometimes do this even as white-collar employees or high-level professionals, okay? So we get to engage in self-blame instead of looking for answers in systems or in structures. So meritocracy doesn't remove inequality, okay? It explains it in a way that makes it feel justified. Let's go back to that basketball game that I said at the beginning of this podcast, the one between El Salvador and the United States. No one watching that says, that's just effort. No, we immediately see systems, investment, structure, and all other relevant things. But in everyday life, we don't apply that same logic. We switch frameworks. Meritocracy is not completely false. Again, please don't get me wrong. It is just incomplete. And when you mistake a partial truth for a full explanation, you stop seeing the system. So this is the public sociologist. Everything social, explained. And in our next episode, we are going to be talking about March Madness. And we will ask this simple question. Is it really chaos, or is it structured in ways we don't notice? Because we use the word madness, and madness implies irregularity or chaos. So we are going to take a look at March Madness while we are at it in these days from a closer perspective. Let's keep in touch, and I hope to meet you again in another podcast. Bye.